You sat on the kitchen floor with a metal box that weighed more than your school bag. You opened it and the smell hit you, steel and machine oil and something you couldn't name yet but would spend the rest of your life chasing. Inside were hundreds of metal beams with holes punched through them, a bag of tiny bolts and nuts, a set of gears that looked like they belonged in a clock, and a motor, a real motor, and a manual that showed you how to build a Ferris wheel that actually turned. You were 9 years old, the Erector Set was yours, and nothing in your life was ever the same. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. You started with the small set. Everybody started with the small set. The one your parents could afford, the one with enough beams to build a chair, or a bridge, or a wagon that rolled if you pushed it. No motor, no gears, just metal and bolts, and the patience to line up the holes and tighten the nuts with a wrench that was almost too small for your fingers. You sat on the floor and opened the manual and looked at the pictures and picked the one that seemed possible. Not the Ferris wheel, not yet. Something smaller, a windmill maybe, or a crane, something with 4 legs and a crossbeam, and the satisfaction of knowing that when you picked it up and shook it, it didn't fall apart, that it held, that you had built something that held. That was the first lesson the Erector Set taught you, and you didn't even know you were learning it. You were learning that structure matters, that if you bolted 3 beams into a triangle, it was stronger than 4 beams in a square, that a diagonal brace could save a bridge, that a bolt tightened a quarter turn past snug held better than one cranked until the thread stripped. You were 9 years old and you were learning engineering on a kitchen floor with a wrench the size of your thumb, and nobody called it engineering. They called it playing. The next Christmas, or the birthday after that, or the one after that, you got the bigger set. And the bigger set had the motor. You remember the motor. Everyone remembers the motor. It was small and black and heavier than it looked, with a metal casing that got warm when it ran, and it had 2 wires coming out the back that connected to a battery pack, and when you wired it up and flipped the switch and the shaft began to spin, something happened inside your chest that you had never felt before. The shaft turned. The gear on the shaft turned the gear on the axle. The axle turned the wheel. And the thing you built, the crane or the conveyor belt or the little car with the pulley-driven wheels, moved. Not because you pushed it, not because gravity pulled it, because electricity flowed through a wire into a motor that spun a shaft that turned a gear that moved a machine that you built with your own hands on a floor that was covered in metal shavings and lost bolts, and the instruction manual you had memorized 3 pages at a time. You had built something that moved under its own power. And the sound that motor made, that low, steady hum that vibrated through the metal frame and into the floor and up through your knees, that sound was the sound of understanding, the sound of knowing how something works because you built it yourself. The gears were the next revelation. The manual showed you how a small gear turning a large gear slowed things down but made them stronger. How a large gear turning a small gear sped things up but made them weaker. How a worm gear could turn motion 90 degrees. How a pulley could lift something heavier than you could lift with your hands. These were not words you learned in school. These were things you discovered on the floor of your bedroom at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, while your mother vacuumed around you and your father read the paper, and nobody in the house knew that the boy on the floor was teaching himself the principles that would carry him through a career he hadn't chosen yet. Because that is what the Erector Set did. It did not entertain you, it did not distract you, it did not blink or beep or require batteries for anything except the motor. It sat in a metal box and waited for you to open it and figure out what to build next. And every time you opened it, you were a little better than the last time. Your fingers were a little surer. Your bolts were a little tighter. Your structures were a little more ambitious. You went from the windmill to the crane, to the drawbridge, to the Ferris wheel, and each one taught you something the last one didn't, and each one failed in a way the last one hadn't, and each failure taught you more than the success that came before it. The Ferris wheel was the mountain. Every boy who owned an Erector Set remembers the Ferris wheel. It was on the cover of the manual. It was the picture you looked at when you first opened the box. The thing you knew you weren't ready for yet but would be someday. It was the model that said, if you can build this, you can build anything. It had a motor and a gear reduction and a central axle and 8 arms radiating out to 8 passenger cars that swung freely on their own tiny axles. It took hours. It took patience you didn't think you had. It took starting over twice because the gear ratio was wrong, or the axle was crooked, or one arm was a 1/4 inch shorter than the others, and the whole thing wobbled when it turned. But when it worked, when you finally got the last bolt tight and the motor wired and the switch flipped and the gears meshed and the wheel began to turn slowly, heavily, the passenger cars swinging gently outward as the centrifugal force caught them, you sat back on your heels and watched it and felt something you had never felt before. Pride. Not the pride of winning a game or getting an A on a test, the pride of making something real, something mechanical, something that moved because you understood how it moved and built it accordingly. You could have watched that wheel turn for an hour. You probably did. And somewhere behind you, your father stood in the doorway and watched you watch it, and he felt something too. Something about his son, and a box of metal beams, and a Saturday afternoon that he would remember long after he forgot what year it was. That pride never left you. It is still in there. Every engineer, every architect, every mechanic who reads these words knows exactly what I am talking about. You wanted more. You always wanted more. More beams, more gears, more bolts, more pulleys. The bigger set in the catalog, the Master Builder set with 600 parts and a motor and a gearbox and a manual that showed locomotives and factories and construction cranes so complex they took 2 days to build and another day to admire before you took them apart and started the next one. You circled it in the Sears catalog the way other boys circled bicycles. You calculated how many lawns you would have to mow. You brought it up at dinner, casually, the way you always did, as if you had just thought of it, as if you hadn't been thinking about it since September. You left the catalog open on the coffee table with the page folded down. And sometimes, on the Christmas mornings that you remember best, the ones where the tree was lit, and the house smelled like coffee and wrapping paper, and your father was watching from the doorway with a look on his face that you didn't understand until you had children of your own. Sometimes you got it, and you sat on the floor with 600 parts spread around you like a kingdom, and you didn't get up until the Ferris wheel was done. And sometimes you didn't get it. And when you didn't, you built the locomotive anyway out of the parts you had, improvising where the manual called for a beam you didn't own, substituting a shorter piece for a longer one, bending a bracket into a shape the factory never intended, finding a way to make it work with what you had. That was the second lesson the Erector Set taught you, and it was the one that mattered most. You can build anything if you are willing to solve the problems that stand between the idea and the thing. The man who gave you all of this was someone you should know about because his life was more unbelievable than any model in that manual. Alfred Carlton Gilbert was born in Salem, Oregon in 1884. He was frail as a child, but competitive, and he won a tricycle race at 7. By 18, he held the world record for consecutive chin-ups. By 24, he had won an Olympic gold medal in the pole vault at the 1908 London Games, and he invented the pole vault box that is still used in every competition today. He had a medical degree from Yale. He was a professional magician who paid his tuition with card tricks. And in 1911, riding a train from New Haven to New York, he watched construction workers erecting steel girders to carry electrical lines, and he thought, what fun to make things with miniature girders. That night, he sat at his dining room table with his wife and cut miniature beams out of cardboard. The next day, he had a toolmaker build them from steel. 2 years later, the Erector Set was the most popular construction toy in America. And Gilbert, Dr. Gilbert, the Olympic champion, the magician, the man who could have been anything, chose to spend the rest of his life making toys for boys. He wrote a personal message in every manual. I am proud to have you as one of my boyfriends. I know what boys like because I am still a boy at heart myself. He meant it. He punched the time clock every morning alongside his 5,000 workers in New Haven. He visited the night shift once a week. He offered paid maternity leave and health insurance before any other toy company. He called his employees co-workers. He wore old suits and rubber-soled shoes and carried a pipe that he sometimes stuck in his pocket while still lit. And in 1918, when the United States government considered banning toy production to focus on the war effort, Gilbert took a satchel full of Erector Sets to Washington, walked into a room full of cabinet secretaries, and let them play. The Secretary of the Navy built a bridge. The Secretary of the Interior built a windmill. The Secretary of War built something nobody could identify, but everyone agreed was impressive. And when the vote came, they decided that toys were essential, that children needed them, that the nation needed the engineers those children would become. The press called Gilbert the man who saved Christmas. His ads said it plainly: boys today, men tomorrow. And they weren't wrong. By 1935, he had sold more than 30 million Erector Sets. An Erector Set was used to build the precursor to the first artificial heart pump at Yale in 1949. A chemist invented the soft contact lens using an Erector Set. Thousands of engineers, architects, and mechanics credit their childhood Erector Set with starting their careers. Gilbert didn't just sell a toy, he sold a future. And for 30 million boys, that future began on a kitchen floor with a metal box and a bag of bolts and a motor that hummed. Gilbert retired in 1954. He handed the company to his son, A.C. Gilbert Jr. And what happened next is the part that should make you angry. The son was not the father. The space race had begun, and children wanted rockets and astronauts and things that looked like the future. Gilbert Jr. was slow to adapt. The product line stagnated. Competitors including Mattel, Hasbro, and newer companies with newer ideas ate into the market. When Gilbert Sr. died in January 1961, the family sold their shares to the Jack Rather Group. Rather looked at the Erector Set, at the metal beams, the real gears, and the working motor, and decided it was too expensive to manufacture. They added plastic parts, they cheapened the construction, they made it look modern, and in doing so, they destroyed the thing that made it work. The metal, the weight, the realness, the feeling of building something that could hold a book on top of it without collapsing. They took that away and replaced it with plastic that flexed and bent and felt like a toy instead of a machine. In 1967, 6 years after Gilbert's death, 54 years after the first set was sold at the Broadway Central Hotel, the A.C. Gilbert Company filed for bankruptcy. 5,000 jobs in New Haven gone. The factory that had built 30 million sets, the factory where Gilbert himself punched the clock every morning and visited the night shift every Wednesday and threw a Christmas party for every worker's child, closed. The parking lot emptied, the machines stopped. The presses that had stamped out 1 billion tiny metal beams with perfectly spaced holes fell silent. And the name that had been on every manual, every box, every advertisement for half a century, "Hello, boys," was silent too. The workers went home. Some of them had worked there for 30 years. Some of them were the children of workers who had been there when Gilbert was alive, when the boss wore rubber-soled shoes and a pipe in his pocket and knew your name and your wife's name and asked about your kids. Those workers had built the toy that built a generation. and now they were out of work because a dead man's son couldn't keep the lights on. They sold the brand. Gabriel Industries got it, then Ideal Toys, then Tyco, then Meccano. Each owner stripped away a little more of what made it real. Today you can buy something called Erector by Meccano. It is plastic. It is made in China. It is not the same. It is not the same in the way that a photograph of a campfire is not the same as sitting next to one. The heat is missing, the weight is missing, the smell of steel and machine oil is missing. The feeling of tightening a real bolt with a real wrench on a real metal beam is missing. Everything that mattered is missing. But here is what they cannot take. They cannot take the Saturday morning when you sat cross-legged on the linoleum with the manual open to page 47 and the motor wired to the battery pack and the Ferris wheel half-built and your whole life ahead of you. They cannot take the moment the gears meshed and the wheel began to turn. They cannot take the feeling of your mother stepping over your legs on her way to the kitchen and saying dinner's in an hour without looking down because she always knew, that you were somewhere she couldn't reach, somewhere between the manual and the machine, somewhere where the beams lined up and the bolts held and the motor hummed and the boy on the floor was becoming someone. An Olympic champion built this toy, a magician, a doctor who chose play over practice, a man who saved Christmas by letting grown men play with girders on a table in Washington. He sold 30 million sets and employed 5,000 people and proved that a metal beam with holes in it could teach a boy more about the world than any textbook ever written. And his son destroyed it. And the companies that bought the name destroyed it again. And the factory in New Haven is gone, and the metal is gone, and the manual with "Hello, boys" on the cover is gone. But the box is still in your basement, you know it is. The metal one with the red label and the picture of the Ferris wheel. You haven't opened it in 40 years. The gears are probably rusted. The motor probably doesn't run. The bolts are probably in a bag that's been opened and closed so many times the paper has worn through. But if you opened it tonight, if you sat down on the floor the way you sat down when you were 9 and laid out the beams, and found the manual and picked up the wrench, you could still build it. The Ferris wheel, page 47, 8 arms, 8 cars, 1 motor, 1 boy who never forgot what it felt like when the wheel began to turn. You could still build it because the Erector Set didn't just teach you how to build machines, it taught you how to build yourself. And that is the one thing nobody, not the sun, not the corporation, not the bankruptcy, not the plastic, can take away.